All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. My name is Tessa Tovar. I am your host. I am really looking forward to today's conversation with Rebecca A. Ward, LMFT, SEP, PCC. Rebecca, you're going to have to help me with these acronyms. There's quite a few in here, and I want to make sure I'm understanding and honoring what they are.
Yeah.
But before we go there, well, actually, do you want to tell me a little bit about them?
The LMFT is I'm a licensed therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist. And the SEP is a somatic experiencing practitioner. That's a specialization where I'm specialized in trauma, working with trauma. And the PCC is a professional certified coach. So I do executive coaching as well.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So many accolades there. Lots of study. So I'll continue with the bio, just so people get the lay of the land, they get to know you a little bit, and then we'll have an amazing conversation. So Rebecca, you're also an American therapist, a healer, author, speaker, and coach, which you just basically described to us. Also a trauma survivor. You have triumphed over extraordinary suffering and come out on the other side to your joy again. And your new book, The Paper Tiger Syndrome, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see in the back of Rebecca's video, the cover. It's a beautiful cover. So in the book, The Paper Tiger Syndrome, How to Liberate Yourself from the Illusion of Fear, Rebecca shares her personal trauma to resilience story and wisdom from her own clients. She'll help readers transform their own trauma wounds into personal growth, presence, resilience, and joy, and reconnect back to the truest version of themselves, what she calls the original blueprint. Rebecca describes herself as a secular mystic who believes in the marriage between science and spirituality, and that souls on the planet are integrated one. One is capital O-N-E. Connected to the infinite source and separated only by the body. She is an advocate for human rights and climate change and has one mission in life: to help heal the world. Amen, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being on the show today. And how are you doing?
So happy to be here. I'm doing great. A little bit hot today, as we talked about. It's getting hotter and hotter here on the planet, and today's the first day of summer, so it's a reminder that things are changing on this planet. Yeah,
91 degrees where you are.
Yes, with no air conditioning. So as some of your viewers can see, my hair's blowing like Beyonce because I've got a fan on.
It's very glamorous. I really hope people watch this video. She's like a supermodel and, just many other things. So I think where I want to start with this is, original blueprint is something that's central to the book.
Yes.
I kind of want to start there. Will you dive into what original blueprint is?
Absolutely. And I should probably also describe the paper tiger. What is a paper tiger? Because a lot of people don't know what that is either. It's sort of explained in the subtitle of the book, How to Liberate Yourself from the Illusion of Fear. A paper tiger is something that appears to be threatening, but is in fact powerless. The illusion of fear. And the original blueprint is... I coined the phrase because I felt like we needed something to define who we were intended to be when we came into the bodies, when we inhabited a body. The soul inhabited a body, came into the world. And when we came into this world, we were pure. That is the purest form. The original blueprint is the purest form of the human expression of the soul. That's how the original blueprint comes in. It's the soul inhabiting the body. And the journey from that moment forward is about overcoming adversity, moving through grief and suffering, also joy and pleasure in life, right? But the more we get into our human lives here on the planet, the further we get away from that pure self. And that's, I believe, by design. And
Sorry, not to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
It's funny, I was just reading through that chapter last night where you kind of talk about the purpose for suffering, adversity, all the experiences have meaning.
Yes.
And I wonder if we could unpack that a little bit. I often think about, okay, well, I kind of toggle back and forth between, yes, I believe that, but also there's part of me that goes, well, what about the senseless acts of violence? What about the senseless poverty? What about the senseless war? What about the ego-driven maniac that, I don't know. Some of it seems a little bit senseless to me. Mm-hmm. So can we unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that every experience, just about every experience, I hate to say every experience, but a lot of the experiences we have in our lives are here to teach us something. Mm-hmm. Even the pandemic was an opportunity for us to, pandemos is the Greek word for all of us. All of us, right? So the message I believe that the pandemic was about was come together. What happens on one side of the world affects people on the other side. And the message, I think, from the universe, from science, our spiritual sense, not religious, but the spiritual sense is it's time for us to come together, to wake up to the impact we have on the world, the impact that we have on each other, the impact we have on the planet. That was, I believe, the message that we were supposed to take away. We are supposed to take away from the pandemic. And I think in moments where we are faced with, a violence, it's another opportunity for us to ask the question, what are we here to learn from this? We should be looking at these messages coming through and asking ourselves, who do we want to be as a society, as a people, as a culture, as a nation, as a globe of what I call the global village or the collective you, right? And those moments are passing us. Each time we don't come together, we're further and further away from who we were supposed to be when we came into the earth, we came into the planet. So I don't think they're senseless. I think they are meant to teach us something. And we often miss that message. So part of it is we all have to sort of wake up to the side of all of us that sends like these bigger messages to us that we're missing. And so that's kind of how I see when evil comes in, when violence comes in, it's here to pressure test us. Because when the soul inhabits a body, it's the first time it experiences separation from the collective, separation from the oneness of who we are as beings. And if you believe in science, that energy never goes away. It just transforms. So that energy that we're all part of, when we inhabit a body, it's an opportunity for us to experience separateness. And separateness means we have to really work at being compassionate and kind, because it's very easy for us to not feel what other people feel. Right? So when these challenges come in, these are assignments for all of us to look at and say, how can we rise up to our higher selves? How can we be better as a community, as a society, as a culture, as a nation, as a planet? And we sometimes miss that message. We forget that we're here to learn how to be compassionate. That's fundamentally what every human being is here to learn.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's easy to get lost in the questioning of why and not dive into yes, that's a helpful reminder, this idea of separateness. I think of separateness as an illusion, kind of like the ego can get us off on the wrong track pretty easily if we forget that there is a collective good, that there is more of a purpose to waking up and being on this planet together.
Yeah.
I'm there's so many different directions I want to go. I feel like I always say that. So listeners
No
are used to me
worries.
bouncing all over the place and going back. I love hearing origin stories, and you have such a body of work and study under you. And so I'm curious about your own path that led you here to this work. I imagine it was windy and up and down, and you had many, as you call them, pressure tests to guide you in this direction. Would you give us some background about who you are and how you came to be doing
Yeah,
this work?
sure. Well, when I was a little kid, I just knew there was something more to life's experiences than what we see. I just had this feeling that there was something more coming my way. And I didn't expect what happened, but I had a number of different experiences in my 20s and 30s and early 40s that challenged my sense of who I was and what I was capable of, how much capacity I had, how much resilience I had. I am a 3-time cancer survivor, and all primaries that were in fact diagnosed on the same day, almost 10 years ago, actually. And those cancers, in my case, there's lots of reasons why people get cancer, but for me, they were all rooted in grief that I had experienced from the loss of my father when I was 20, and from the loss of my 2 boys. I had 2 boys that died in the 3rd trimester of my pregnancy. They were born, and they died the same day they were born. So all of those cancers manifested repressed grief. That for me, I didn't know what I know now. And that grief, there's a lot of books out there about how when emotions, which are energy, aren't processed, sometimes they turn into toxicity in the body. And those cancers all manifested in the places where either the loss of my father from his own cancer or the loss of my children manifested in those places where you bring life into the world. So that's the way my body worked with the grief. It said, okay, well, you're not processing it, so I'm going to have you excise it through tumors. And I don't think any of that happened to me out of coincidence. I think it was all by design. It was by design so that I could help other people learn how to be resilient, to build capacity, to learn how to regulate their nervous system so they're not living in fear. Fear can manifest in all kinds of ways, including grief, repressed anger, reactivity to the people around us. Fear is the source of most of the problems that we experience in this world. We are run by fear. And if we can learn to work with the nervous system to regulate our distinction between what is a real threat, imminent threat, and perceived threat, then we have a lot more control about how we think, act, and feel in life, the choices we make, and how we live our lives. Mm-hmm. And I believe that a big part of our suffering, including my own, is the lack of recognition of how much fear runs us.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too about, so when you talk about fear being perceived, illusionary, and real, I think a lot about what about those of us that experience it on such a low level? Like I think about a radio being turned way down.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like really easy to tune out because it almost becomes normal, right? It's expected. So like if that fear, that low level anxiety were to go away, then maybe you would think, oh, something's wrong. Right. Something's not right.
Right.
So I wonder about how do we start to acknowledge the fear in our lives. Is it running us? Is it something that needs to be addressed? Is it, I'm using this in quotes, just anxiety? What am I anxious over? Where is that coming from? There are a million questions in there.
Yes, of course. Yeah. I actually have a quiz on my website that because a lot of people aren't aware of their own fears. You know, they can say, I'm not afraid of anything. I've even found myself saying that sometimes. I'm not really afraid of anything. But your nervous system is designed to make sure you don't feel too much of that. That's how it's designed. And to keep you, healthy. But the reality of it is a lot of our choices in life, and I'll give you some examples of what that looks like, so some of your viewers can test it. And you can also go to my website to take the full quiz. But for example, are you afraid of what the recession might do to your financial stability?
Yes.
Right? Are there people in your life, someone you're close to, that you're afraid to have a hard conversation with? Do you avoid conflict? Are you ever afraid of contracting a serious illness? Are you afraid of aging? When you notice wrinkles on your face, what happens, right? These are examples. So I could see your face has changed. Do you feel anything inside your body?
Well, first of all, I answered yes to all of those questions as you were asking them.
Yeah.
And what's changed inside my body? That's such an interesting question, because I feel like I'm kind of having this reaction where I'm laughing at myself.
That's anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's often how I first notice fear showing up.
Yes.
Is the kind of laughing it off, like, oh, that's silly.
Yeah, it's a natural way to release the anxiety you have, is through laughter. It's actually accessing a very important bundle of nerves in your body called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. It's the largest bundle of nerves in your body, and it is at the seat of how your nervous system perceives real and perceived threat. So when you feel anxiety, you can even imagine something like, if you've ever watched a chase between two animals on TV, like a cheetah chasing a gazelle, and that is not happening in the moment. You're not there, but your system will respond to it as if it's happening. Your breath shortens. I noticed like your breath got a little bit shallower when I was asking those questions, right? And then anxiety is the vagus nerve gripping your lungs and your throat. So what we want to do is work with the nervous system so that it's not sending false messages to your brain that you're under threat. That stress, that anxiety. 2/3 of all Americans are suffering from some underlying health condition, which in part has to do with the degree of stress we're under. And that stress comes from a nervous system that is dysregulated. It's not recognizing the difference between real and perceived threats. It's not to say that things aren't stressful, but we don't need the nervous system to respond that way. We need a nervous system that's regulated so that we can think and feel simultaneously. We can stay in what I call our window of resilience, where your nervous system is capable of managing and metabolizing stress in healthy ways, rather than setting off this stress response that ultimately really takes down all of your critical organs, that all that energy is misdirected into a stressor that doesn't require that level of energy directed in that way. So regulating the nervous system is at the seat of liberating yourself from fear. And that's what the book is all about. I talk about the science. I talk about the spirituality of how our systems are wired, how our primitive wiring still runs us. It's the primary default in the way that we live our lives. We're unconscious to it, but that is the default a system that helps us function in life. And we have to learn to regulate it. That mechanism inside us, that nervous system, creates both the understanding of what is a paper tiger and what is a real tiger, a real threat, which is very rare in modern times. It happens, but our system is just misfiring all the time at these, what it perceives to be real tigers, real threats.
Yeah. When I first opened the book and I read about the paper tiger myth, I was like, that's what it's called, because I've been describing it as this alarm clock that I can't turn off, that I put around a chain and I carry it around with me all day. and it's annoying for me and it's annoying for everyone else around me. And the paper tiger there's a word for it. So it's like,
Yes.
now there's a label. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Which is
My
helpful.
clients have learned to use it when we're in session together. They'll say, "Oh, this is a paper tiger, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it's a paper tiger. That's right."
Yeah. It's helpful to have ways to categorize, I think, in some situations. So there's a couple of things I want to follow up on. So the quiz on the website, is there just one quiz, or what is this particular quiz called? I want to make sure that we point to it in the show notes.
Yeah. It's on the homepage. There's only one.
Okay, great. Easy to find.
Yes, easy to find. There is another survey on there, but it's in a separate section. It's called the ACE study.
Yes.
It helps people. Yeah.
Very familiar. Go ahead. Adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah. Adverse childhood experiences. It was a study that started back at Kaiser Permanente about 3 decades ago. And they followed how certain characteristics in childhood development can impact our overall ability to thrive in life. And the survey that's on my website is taken directly from the CDC in that study. So it's a set of questions that help you determine how impacted you've been from your own childhood and the traumas that you've been through. I am an ACE kid. So just because you have a high score on that survey does not mean that you can't live a full and productive life. It just means that you really need to work with your nervous system so that you're regulated. It's there's just so many effects from being impacted by a childhood trauma that we really need to, one, be aware of it, and two, have the tools to overcome it.
Yeah. Well, and that brings me back to another question I wanted to follow up on, which is when you're receiving these diagnoses for cancer.
Yes.
What was that like? I mean,
it was horrible.
Yeah. Terrifying, I'm sure.
Oh my God. Yeah. I had several doctors tell me I was going to die within a year or two. And with just matter of fact, no empathy whatsoever. You're going to die. Well, I'm not going to die. I've been here for 10 years and I'm going to stay here. I'm not going anywhere. I think a big part of what helped me was my own wake-up call. That all of that helped me recognize how I wasn't taking care of myself, that I wasn't prioritizing me, and I needed to change that. And so it changed everything for me. I changed careers. I moved. I left a relationship. A number of things changed in my life as a result of some pretty significant trauma. But it was all for the better. I would not really, honestly, would not change anything about my life because it's all helped me get where I am today.
Yeah.
And it was hard. I mean, I remember in the moments just following those diagnoses, feeling sheer terror. That was how it felt. I couldn't sleep for weeks. I was constantly afraid that at any moment I was going to die. I mean, it was an awful few weeks there, but I think it helped me recognize, once you move through fear like that at that level, you come out the other side feeling more courageous, more resilient, more capacity to be able to tolerate what happens in life. And again, it's all by design. It's all helped me get where I am today.
So how did you make that? You're receiving these diagnoses, obviously you're experiencing a tremendous amount of fear, and you go through that process of, I guess, digesting these diagnoses, and then make these big life decisions. Mm-hmm. Was that a progression, or was it like a moment, kind of like a light bulb? Or I'm curious about the thought process, or not just the thought process, but the whole body experience of going through that fear, going down that dark tunnel and coming out the other side.
Yeah. Well, it was both, it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I'd have a light bulb and then I would have a big reaction to something, be afraid again, come back, find my center, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So, it really, the whole journey really took about 7 years for me to move through everything. And really, there's very few things in life I'm afraid of anymore because of all that. It's been a huge gift, but it was hard. I was a mess for years. I mean, before the cancers, I've done everything, not everything, but I've done a lot of things wrong in life. I made a lot of mistakes. But I believe that mistakes are important because as long as you're learning new ones, you're growing, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't want to avoid making mistakes. You don't want to avoid not recognizing your failures because that's what's going to help you grow. And, change lives in uncomfortable places. Failure is uncomfortable, but it's part of what helps us grow as people. But it was hard. It was a hard journey, very hard.
Were there any people with you along the way that were helping hold you up? Any books that you read? Were you doing work with a therapist?
Yes, I had a huge support system, and in particular, the whole experience really helped me connect to my mother again. She was huge. She was a nurse at the hospital where I had all the surgeries and treatments. So she knew all the doctors, she knew the anesthesiologist. She was incredibly helpful. And I had a great network of friends. There were prayer circles happening all over the country, people helping me just heal. That energy moving towards me was very, very helpful. I think any time that we go through anything in life, the most important thing is our support system. It is essential, and it doesn't have to be big. It can be one person, but whatever that is, whatever your support system looks like, it is essential to how we move through our suffering. When we go through things like cancer, it's an opportunity for us to come together as a community to support each other. Crisis, I think what I call in the book, I call it the huddle effect. When there's a crisis that happens, human beings come together. So that's always a wonderful thing that comes out of a crisis, that we learn who our support system truly is, who's really going to be there for us. I think anybody who's watching or listening to this knows if you've been through a crisis, that's when you find out who the people are in your life that are going to be there for you. Yeah. So, and I also think that for me, having a spiritual sense, it doesn't have to be religious. I'm not religious, but I have always believed that there's something out there that's bigger than me, right? That there's some kind of infinite source that can hold everything that we go through. So people can do just so much, but they don't have infinite capacity. So in addition to the people in your life, can you find some infinite source or infinite capacity to help you hold what you're going through? And if you're more science oriented, just look down below, underneath your feet. There's gravity holding you right now. So if nothing else, gravity is holding you.
I love that. Right? That's such a great visual, very tangible exercise. And speaking of spirituality, you mentioned something a few minutes ago. I think what I heard you say was the spirituality of how the nervous system is wired.
Yes.
Did I capture that?
Yes.
Will you explain to me what you mean by that?
Sure. So, and I can't take credit for this because I didn't coin this phrase. There's a gentleman by the name of Resmaa Menakem. He wrote the book, My Grandmother's Hands. It's a wonderful book about trauma. I would highly recommend it. He coined this phrase when he speaks about the vagus nerve. He calls it the soul nerve. And I don't know if other people can feel this, but when my system is regulated, when that vagus nerve is relaxed, when it's settled, I can feel my soul right here. There's a feeling inside here that I recognize that my soul resides right there in my heart space. And in the world of somatic therapy, there's what we call what's it called? I can't remember the name of the word. Anyway, the vagus nerve is the soul nerve. And that is what I truly believe that system is designed. As I said earlier, it's a mechanism to help you either recognize it's a paper tiger or recognize that it's a real threat. And that system is helping us or teaching us how to recognize, especially with people, other people, that they're not a threat. That to recognize that this system, this separation of souls through the body and through this vagus nerve is really just an assignment for all of us to recognize our connection, that you and I are made of the same matter. We are all made of the same. We are thousands of years old. Our DNA is all connected. There's very little that's different between me and you. And so if we can recognize that spiritual sense of how our bodies are designed to both teach us separation and togetherness. Threat is separation. Safety and a system that is regulated is togetherness. So when you feel safe, other people don't perceive them as threats. If we have differences in our belief systems or the way we look at the world, it's really just an opportunity for us to rise above that and connect with each other, rise above our differences and connect with a system that recognizes sameness, not otherness.
I think that's a really important distinction to highlight, that these are tangible somatic experiences you can hopefully, I don't want to oversimplify this regulation of the nervous system, because I do think it takes some, study and training and practice to get to that place, especially if you have a high ACE score, if you do have a lot of trauma. But I think it's really important to put language to, okay, this is how I can tangibly recognize that my nervous system is regulated. This is how I can tangibly recognize that my nervous system is on high alert and it's out of balance. This is what it feels like.
Yes.
That's really helpful. I think where I go, though, when I think about that is, how do we get to that place where we can slow down enough that we can pause and ask ourselves, is it like this constant conversation we're having with ourselves about, how am I doing? How am I doing right now? Okay, how am I doing right now? Or, how do we get to that place where it's like, oh, I notice that I'm feeling safe right now. Yes. That must mean that my nervous system is regulated.
Yeah, well, I would say that it's not a constant. Once you have a nervous system that's more regulated than not, no one's perfect. I'm not always a regulated nervous system myself.
Yeah.
But I'm more often regulated than not. And I don't have to do the same practices and repeat the same practices as often as I used to, because my system has created a new neurophysiology. When you repeat one practice over and over and over again, roughly around 300 times, it's in your muscle memory. If you repeat that same practice 3,000 times, which seems like a lot, but if you do it 10 times a day, that's like 10 months, right? At 3,000 times, it's your new way. It's your new way of being. It's in every cellular structure of your body. So that's when you really don't have to practice as frequently. So you're just in a system that feels present and connected. When you're in your body, your body is always present. If you can feel a sensation in your body, you're present. Even if it's just the breath is the simplest way to recognize you're present. It's only the mind that takes us somewhere else besides here. Mm-hmm. And if you can recognize that what's inside of you is a microcosm of nature. We are 70% fluid, like the earth, 70% water, and 30% matter, mass, right? All of our organs, same thing as the earth, all the land, 30%. So you are a microcosm of nature, which is never judgmental, always present, always present. It's the mind that takes you places. So learning to stay in your body to regulate your nervous system is the way out of fear, because the fear is just conjured by the mind. And it's getting messages from the nervous system, misperceived, right? False messages, false alarms, until we teach it otherwise. And that nervous system is then regulated. It opens up higher order thinking, more creativity, more innovation, more present and whole decision making. Without that, we're making choices from a place of fear. Mm-hmm. And if you believe that, if you're not sure, turn on the news, because the news is always about baiting you into fear. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's up to all of us to make a different choice to change that. Yeah.
So on this subject of fear and the idea that we can move out of fear and make decisions from, I like to call it a place of wisdom, a place of intuition, which to me feels more embodied.
Yes.
There's a question that you ask in the book, and I'd love to read it here just to allow listeners to ask that question of themselves right now. And then also I want to have some discourse over it with you, Rebecca. So the question is, can you remember a time when you felt truly fearless? When you knew without a doubt that the world was safe? Can you ever remember feeling completely liberated from the undercurrent of discontent, anxiety, or suffering that's so prevalent in modern life? So that's more than one question, but it's a question on the same thread of like this call to action of, whoa, let's stop for a second and ask ourselves, can we remember a time when we were free from that fear? And as I was reading and preparing for our interview, it was almost like I kind of stopped for a second and started to ask myself that question. And there was like this blank static that I was met with. And I felt like, okay, well, I'd probably have to sit here for a little bit longer, but the mind is so busy and wanted to take me into the next thing that on my to-do list that I didn't sit with that question. Mm-hmm. And so, and I'm not sure, how that's relevant other than just to say, like, maybe it doesn't come easily at first to answer that question, but I'm sure it's worth sitting with it. What are your thoughts on all of this? Can you easily recall a time when you were, I know you've done the work and now like perhaps you can sit in that fearlessness, but thinking back to an earlier version of yourself, maybe 10 years ago.
No, I definitely did not feel that way. I felt all the undercurrent of fear and stress and anxiety. And it was buzzing around in me day in and day out, day in and day out. Yeah. And I know what that feels like. Far less today, very significantly less today than before. Yeah. I rarely ever feel that now, but again, I think the key word from all of that is the undercurrent. It's like this buzzing, like uneasiness that we feel, and we don't recognize it because we've been living with it most of our lives, if not all our lives. So we don't know what it's like to not have that until we don't. When that undercurrent of that uneasiness is lifted. And I've seen this happen with most of my clients who've been through, the deep work with me. They don't have that anymore. It's lifted. Mm-hmm.
And how do you get? I think about. I've been in therapy since I was 5 years old. I think was when I first remember going to therapy. It was always something that my parents wanted us to have as a tool, and they used as a tool themselves. Mm-hmm. So I'm grateful for that. And also I think about, being that young, 5 years old, I try to think of memories before that preceded, because why was I in therapy at 5 years old? Mm-hmm. Well, I was already having traumatic experiences. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm asking myself that question and I can't really remember anything before 5, that was joyful or fearless, where do we go from there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're now we're talking about developmental trauma. And developmental trauma affects, they say, roughly 40% of the population. I think it's higher than that. But the traumas that happen to us, even pre-verbal, are the imprint for life. In Bruce Perry's recent book that he just published, he talks about the first 2 months of life essentially is the imprint. Those 2 months are the imprint for the rest of how that body functions in life. So you can have 2 fantastic first 2 months of life and the rest being chaotic. And you'll function better than if someone had the first 2 months of disruption and dysregulation or stress, and then had a wonderful life after that. So again, it is not a sentence to misery, not at all life sentence. It's a matter of understanding your own history and working with either a professional or a combination of a book like mine and a professional to help regulate your nervous system. So if you were born into a body that went through trauma in utero, your system has a bigger challenge, not impossible, not at all, but a different kind of challenge, because the system has never recognized the absence of that undercurrent, right? So even more important that we learn to regulate that nervous system. And I will tell you, those people who've never recognized it, when they feel it on a level that no one else does. It's like, they're just blown away at how pleasurable it is to be in a body that feels content, that feels at peace inside. It's extraordinary, that absence of that undercurrent that's been lifted. Yeah.
When you say that, it makes me think of, this is the anxious trauma child speaking. She's like, I'm talking about my subconscious traumatized child, is saying, okay, I could get to that place. Like, I believe you. And then what happens when I get triggered?
You'll have the tools.
Yes. And what are those tools? Can we talk about the tools?
Yeah. So first, it's a recognition that you're being triggered. So when you're a child, I like that you use third person, because when you're doing developmental trauma, you want to speak about that younger version of yourself in third person. So she's having an experience. Whenever you feel shame is a child's emotion. Shame happens right around the age of 5. Because in that phase of our development, this is the first stage of egocentrism, around 5, give or take, right? And that system is recognizing that everything that's happening in my life is about me, including, for example, my parents getting a divorce, it's my fault. I internalize everything at that age as if it's all about me, including the bad things. That's shame, right? So shame, when you feel shame, when you feel something that's outsized to the current situation, it's probably developmental trauma. That system is connecting a constellation of events that have happened to you over the course of your life, and you're feeling it in that moment. It's an outsized reaction. Then it's not me. It's my beautiful little child self that did her very best or his very best to navigate a situation that felt really stressful. And I have better tools, better coping mechanisms to overcome that I can take care of him inside me, love them, meet those needs that were unmet myself, rather than, continuing to suffer in that relationship that you have with yourself. So that is very deep work. Some of it can be helped with some of the practices that I use in the book, that I apply in the book, but not all of it. So developmental trauma really is a very one-to-one repair that happens between a therapist and a client. So it'll get you there to some degree, but some of the deeper work, if it's really running you, I highly recommend that your viewers, your listeners, reach out to a good trauma therapist who understands developmental trauma. And the book and my website, you can see there's resources on the website of links to directories of people who are specialized in that field. And that's the work that I do with most of my clients have some form of developmental trauma.
Will you talk to me a little bit about the styles of therapy? Because there's so many different methods out there. I think of talk therapy as being like the tried and true old school way to approach therapy. And there's certainly somatic experience. There's EMDR. I feel like there's such a list of things. I feel like it would be helpful to go through when we're looking for a therapist for this kind of deep work. What exactly, you said look for somebody who's got experience in developmental trauma. In particular for my situation, I think, and all those listeners out there who resonate with that. But will you walk me through the different styles of therapy?
Absolutely. So, there's a lot of very traditional therapeutic modalities like psychodynamic. There's there are so many, I couldn't possibly take you through all of them, but the more traditional forms of therapy work with the mind more than anything. The progress we've made in the last 40 years in this field really balance things out much more than they used to. There was sort of a change back in the 60s where Buddhism started to influence therapists and this field. And we started to recognize that there's a huge, huge part missing, which is the body and the nervous system. And a lot of the sort of the founders of the somatic therapy modalities picked up on that back in the 60s and have been developing these modalities that incorporate both body and mind. And that's really the direction of where therapy has been going for a long time. So the modalities that incorporate mind and body, and in particular the developmental trauma aspect, include somatic experiencing. There's some sort of add-on trainings that folks take in that field or in that modality to specialize in developmental trauma. Sensory motor psychotherapy is another, where the foundational piece is about the body. They bring in how to work with the mind and work with developmental trauma. I find that to be very effective. And a subset of that called structural dissociation, the work of Janina Fisher, which I talk about in the book. She's had a huge impact on the field, Janina Fisher.
Could we have an example of what that would be like in a therapy session? I mean, you could use me as a guinea pig. I'm just curious. That's not one I've actually heard of before.
Yeah. Well, the structural dissociation is about working with parts from childhood. So it is about making the distinction between your present whole brain self and the developmental stressors that are still impacting her, that child inside you. And the work is about repairing those old memories, which may or may not be accurate. In fact, oftentimes memory is inaccurate.
Yeah.
So what I do with that particular approach, that intervention, is first of all, you got to have a nervous system that is regulated. So it takes some time to get people to build that foundation of regulation. And then you work with a memory from the past, ideally from early childhood, and call that message forward into the present moment and work with you reparenting that part of you that didn't get those needs met. And if it's done well, it can lift a lot of that undercurrent of, shame and the need to please others that we do when we're kids. Some kids fight back. There's different survival strategies that we talk about in the book to kind of raise your awareness about how one of those survival strategies may still be running you. Mm-hmm. And then we work with the memories to repair that, because when we develop as children, that right brain runs childhood. It's the dominant. And then the left brain, it really isn't fully formed until you're in your mid-20s. So you're running on survival strategies for the vast majority of your childhood. And if a stressor hits you, though, that development is in some way slowed down. It doesn't help you continue to develop in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. So that's where those stressors will keep you in an old strategy, an old survival strategy that may not be serving you the way adult ways of surviving or thriving in life will. So we have to repair that.
Yeah. And reparenting, this is something that I have practiced a little bit in therapy also, but I'm wondering if for anyone who's never heard of the term or who hasn't had an opportunity to practice it, if you could give us an example of what that might be, like what kind of a practice would that look like?
Well, one that you can use is to place a hand on your heart space, a hand on your belly, breathe into those places where your hands reside until you feel warmth underneath your hands. And when you feel warmth underneath your hands, that's that younger part of you. And you want to just hang out with that and then begin to reparent that part of you by saying words to it that are reassuring. You are enough. I love you. You did nothing wrong. You're whole. You're safe. I am always with you. You're okay. Those kinds of reassuring words will help that part of you settle. And in and of itself, that can be a very healing experience without having to go into memory. It's just the settling of that part of you that feels that undercurrent of discontent.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If we had more time, I'd actually do it with you, but we don't.
I know. I keep diverging you from that. Was there anything else you wanted to say about the different styles of therapy? Because I kind of took us off that track.
That's okay. No, I have the full list on my website, so people can take a look there and access those directories if they want.
Okay. Well, yes. And let's be mindful of time. I don't want to keep you too long, Rebecca, but I do want to know, whether it's from picking up the book or from listening to this conversation or visiting your website, what is one thing that you hope people take away from this experience?
Yeah. So I think what I want to say to your viewers and your listeners is there is hope. If you are suffering, you don't need to suffer. You are entitled to live a full, happy, productive, enlivening life. And there is no reason to suffer. You can overcome it. It is possible for every human being on this planet to overcome their fears. With a little bit of devotion and dedication, you can move through anything.
That's beautiful, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just really appreciate you showing up and sharing everything you've learned with us and giving us some of your precious time.
It's my pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. I feel better. I do. It's a great way to start the day.
That's it.
So I'll make sure, again, like I said, that all of these links are in the show notes so people can easily find you, your book, your amazing work, and hopefully check it out. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. You enjoy your day.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer,
Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic, musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for outside the studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.